Alright, so we're going to come with these notes a little differently because I know the quiz took a little longer than normal. So you don't have this paper yet. You'll get this after the quiz. You finish it in class, but this helps you follow along. It also goes with this homework, same title here, piecewise functions. So I'm going to talk about what piecewise functions are. It's just multiple parts, multiple functions for the same graph, essentially, for different domains. And I'll show you an example in calculus, which most of you are going to be heading towards. You'll learn how to evaluate different items here. So you want to learn the basics now. This is what a piecewise function looks like. This is all from the same AP Calc test. And it looks fancy, but it's really not that fancy. You can actually use algebra to solve some of this stuff. And so this is the notation you see. It's got this little bracket there. And the function is just saying that we're using this graph for this domain and this graph for this domain. So let me show you how to graph these, and then we'll look at how to evaluate. So to graph this, I'm going to graph 2x plus 1. So I start at 1 and go up to the right one. Now, normally, if you're graphing this whole thing, you just make a line here, right? So if you make it really light using a pencil, we're only using that line when x is greater than or equal to 2. So right here, x equals 2, I'm going to go up to where it's greater than or equal to, and that's going to be the graph. I'm going to use it for that portion, and I'm going to erase everything else. And then we're going to use the line y equals 3 if x is less than 1. So y equals 3 is this line, again, making it kind of light. I'm only going to use that when x is less than 1. So here's 1. Less than means open circle. So I'm only going to use this part of the graph and erase everything else. So at some point you don't need to erase because you'll get good at this, but I would suggest doing the erasing part at first. So the domain is the same as what we used to do, right? Negative infinity. Sorry, that said x to less than 1, not negative 1. There we go. Negative infinity to 1, and then we skip a little bit and we pick up at 2 and we go to infinity. And the range, I don't have any values until I get to 3. I go from 3 to 3, and then I skip something, and then I start at 5 and go to infinity. Okay, so for instance, the question then would say, find f of 4. So what you have to do is determine which of these functions. If you have a graph, you can look, which function am I using for f of 4? Well, that means x equals 4. I'm using the 2x plus 1. So I plug that in there. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9. Said f of 0. Well, I'm on this function, f of 0 equals 3. F of negative 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm at that function, so f of negative 5 equals 3. So you're just determining where you're plugging in. If it said f of 1, that does not exist. It's undefined. There's no value there for 1. Okay, so on this graph, on the homework, you already have the graph for you. You don't have to write an equation. You could, though, if you had to. And it's asking you to find those function values. And then the second part of this question says f of x equals negative 2. In other words, y equals negative 2. What is x? So for that one, you can go right here and look, where is y equals negative 2, and list the x's. There's an x there, and there's an x there. So there's more than one answer. Y equals 10. What is x? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so that would be this line all the way across. Well, at this point, the only thing that's going to intersect that is going to be this curve. So you might have to write an equation for this, doing what we did before. We just took a quiz on. There's the 1, 3, 5 rule. Move over the value. See where the two things intersect. So on the back of this homework paper, there's no graph. If it helps, you can use some of that extra graph paper I gave you, but basically what you're looking at is where does this fall in my range. So I'm using this line when it's bigger than 4. I'm using this line when it's between -5 and 2, and when it's less than or equal to 5, I'm using this line. So you just need to determine where those fall and then just substitute in. Okay? I'm gonna do one more graph on here. Just do one that on the notes that has a few different options here. So one way to do this, some people teach it, is just graph all 3 functions and then erase what you don't need. But I like to go through it a little bit. So when x is bigger than 2, we're going to use the line y equals 5. So you don't have to sketch the whole line. You know you're going to erase from here on over. And then when x is between -2 and 2, we're going to use 2 times the absolute value of x. So that absolute value would, our cusp is at 0, 0. I go up 2 to the right 1 because it's amplified by 2, or it's stretched. And I'm just going to get my sketch ready. And I know it's going all the way up until +2. So I'm going to make sure I have that. And then it goes to -2, same direction there. And then the last part of my graph is the line y equals -x. So again, I would sketch that line. That's got a slope of -1 and the y-intercept is 0. Well, I don't need this part of it. I can erase all the way back until right here. I'm not including that point. So this is a piecewise function. So on this one, the domain never stops it, because wherever there's a little open circle there, it fills into the closed circle, so it never stops. And the range, though, has a different value. So the domain would be all reals. And you can tell that by looking at this. Are there any values that are skipped? You don't actually have to make a graph. The range, though, the smallest value is 0. And then we work our way all the way up. And right here, there's a jump, but it's covered over here. And it's going to keep going forever. So 0 to infinity. And if you want to use set builder, you can, but I like interval notation. So if I'm looking at one like this, again, as long as it's less than -1, that's my graph. So I have a parabola, a horizontal line, and an absolute value. If you want, graph all 3 on there, just ignore this and then erase the parts you don't need. We'll talk about this more in class. Those are the notes that should be able to get you through evaluating piecewise functions paper.